I'll tell you, the anti-vax movement is really complex. And it started actually, I told you, the Jenner vaccine 1790s. The first anti-vax group formed in the early 1800s in England in response to smallpox. So
Wow.
we're not talking about a new thing.
A new
There's been
thing. Yeah.
anti-vaxxers for hundreds of years. As
Wow.
vaccines have developed, people have questioned. And early on, they questioned the issues back then are the same ones we have now. Is this unnatural synthetic thing that's been created as a vaccine, is it safe for me to put in my body? Putting something that's not natural into my body, is this safe? And if you don't understand the science, I completely understand the concern.
Right.
What is it? What are you putting in my body? What is this chemical you're putting in? What is these adjuvants that go in? Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Christopher Stobart, Associate Professor of Biology at Butler University, and you're listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast.
You're listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for all things public health and global health, from the Sustainable Development Goals to the social determinants of health, as well as interesting dialogues about the diverse career opportunities that exist in these fields. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so other people like you can benefit from our content. Imagine a world where a single decision, whether to vaccinate or not, can ripple through families, communities, and even history itself. In this episode, we unravel the science, the skepticism, and the stories behind vaccines. From the origins of inoculation to the modern battle against misinformation, this is a journey into the heart of one of public health's most polarizing debates. The elephant in the room, vaccines. Yeah. You mentioned polio vaccines, smallpox, you mentioned measles vaccines. Where did this concept of vaccinations come from? And what do we mean when we talk about vaccinations? I think in history, you see terms like inoculations and like take us back to the earliest kind of iterations of what we now know as a routine vaccination and how that's kind of evolved over time.
Yeah, so I think before I get into the history side, I think it's important for people to understand what is the purpose of vaccines. There's been a lot of misinformation about, well, the job of vaccines prevents you from getting infected. That's not what the original intent of vaccine is. It's to prevent you from getting severely sick or dying. Okay? So when you take a vaccine, you're trying to teach your immune system to recognize the thing that's going to make you sick. Okay. So our immune systems are an amazing thing. They will recognize and remember the things that have made you sick in the past. Now, in order to do that, naturally, you'd have to get infected and get sick to do so, right?
And beat it.
And beat it, right?
Yeah.
So the whole idea of making a vaccine is to figure out a way to teach your immune system what something looks like without really making you sick. Okay, a safer way to train your immune system to recognize the thing that's trying to make you sick. So, for instance, if you're trying to make a vaccine against HIV, okay, you want to try to vaccinate people for HIV, you're going to find some way to take a piece of that HIV virus and show it to your immune system to train it to recognize HIV, right? So, if you're trying to find a person in a crowd, you're going to want a picture, right? A picture, a photograph. Some information. Oh, this person's wearing a blue hat, sunglasses, and a green shirt. Same thing with your immune system. You're going to want to recognize this virus in the crowd so you can target it before it targets you. You're going to have to train it to recognize something, right? Maybe not the whole thing, but at least a part. So the whole idea with the vaccine is to teach your immune system to recognize what this thing looks like in a safe way or a safer way. Okay.
Than a natural
infection. And so the earliest vaccines, it depends on how you want to define it, but the earliest attempts, going back with smallpox, what was called variolation, and the idea was you take smallpox from somebody, weaken it by drying it out, take scabs, and you blow it up the nose, or you cut into the skin. You'd expose somebody to a kind of a weakened form of the virus, and then your disease is going to be hopefully a little bit less than what it would be if you got naturally infected. And in those techniques, they might have still had mortality rates of 3-4%, but it's better than 30%, right? So those were happening 1,000 years ago. right? Now, the modern vaccine, the first one that usually people credit as a modern vaccine, was the Jenner vaccine. And what he noticed was that milkmaids, this is in the late 1790s, he noticed that milkmaids would go and milk cows, and they would get this virus called cowpox. He didn't know it was a virus, but he knows they get these lesions, these little pox on their bodies. They called it cowpox. But when they got that, they didn't get smallpox. And he put the two together and said, well, something about getting cowpox prevents you from getting smallpox. And so then he went and took cowpox lesions from these milkmaids and tested it and showed that, yeah, it seems to provide some protection against getting smallpox. So he started using that as a vaccine. And the idea there is you're training your immune system to recognize cowpox, which looks a lot like smallpox, but it doesn't cause a disease like smallpox. So it's a safe way or safer way of showing your immune system what this thing looks like. So yeah, maybe instead of having that blue hat and green shirt, maybe it's a blue hat and a teal shirt, but you recognize that you can pull it out of the crowd and you can still do something with it. And so that was the first modern vaccine. And from there, a whole bunch of other vaccines were being developed going through the 1800s and 1900s as we learned more about ways to teach the immune system to recognize these different pathogens. We started creating approaches to do so. There's a lot of ways of teaching the immune system, a different approach to different types of vaccines, but they all work in the general principle of, let me show you a piece or a part of this virus or bacteria so your immune system can recognize it before you get the real thing. And then when you do, you're ready to go. You see it and your immune system's like, oh, I remember that. I'm going to destroy it before it destroys me. And that's the whole idea behind it. And, going back to the safety side, again, the key is it has to be a safe way or safer way than natural infection. And I know there's been a lot of talk about the concern for side effects and potential for these issues to arise. When our American committee decides to give approval for vaccines, they're weighing the pros and cons. And there can be, on occasion, some consequences of putting something in the human body. And again, not everyone responds the same way. But what they look at the data overall, and they say, looking at the science, looking at the data, you're a much better possibility of not getting sick or surviving pathogen X if you get the vaccine versus getting the vaccine. And so it's risk versus benefit. And they make those decisions looking at a ton of data and looking at, does it make sense? Your odds of getting the pathogen and getting sick versus taking the vaccine and getting sick. And I trust a lot of that science. I've looked at the articles, I've read the articles, I've seen the science itself, and it's not done lightly. It takes time, and it takes effort, and there's a lot of science behind it when they make those decisions.
So is one of the challenges then, Dr. Stobart, that there's a sort of risk calculus scientifically with the vaccine development and vaccine administration. But now me as an individual who is will approach it probably in a flawed versus logical way, would say, I don't think I'm going to get it. I think my risk is 0. And if the vaccine has a 0.5% chance of making me sick, I kind of like my risk of 0 of not getting the actual disease and not getting the vaccine. Is that where we kind of get into problems? Like, I know we talk about the anti-vaccine movement, which is like an agenda-driven thing, and not everybody who chooses not to get vaccinated kind of falls in that bucket. But those people that are making those hard decisions every day, are those some of the things that they're thinking about, where at a broader public health scale, we're thinking more of the masses, but then individual decisions and freedom kind of clash there? Is that kind of one of the challenges?
I'll tell you, the anti-vax movement is really complex. And it started, actually, I told you, the Jenner vaccine 1790s. The first anti-vax group formed in the early 1800s in England in response to smallpox.
Wow.
So we're not talking about a new thing. There's been anti-vaxxers for hundreds of years. As vaccines have developed, people have questioned. And early on, the issues back then are the same ones we have now. Is this unnatural synthetic thing that's been created as a vaccine, is it safe for me to put in my body? Putting something that's not natural into my body, is this safe?
Vaccine skepticism isn't new. In 1853, Britain made smallpox vaccination mandatory for infants, sparking mass protests and the rise of the Anti-Vaccination League. The same questions echo today. Is it safe? Is it natural? In 2019, the World Health Organization named vaccine hesitancy a top global health threat as measles cases hit a 25-year high in the United States. The difference now is speed. Social media can amplify doubts worldwide in minutes, fueling outbreaks of disease once thought to be fully controlled.
And if you don't understand the science, I completely understand the concern.
Right.
What is it? What are you putting in my body? What is this chemical you're putting in? What is these adjuvants that go in, that they add in? Right now, recently, they talk about removing thimerosal, which is an adjuvant, right? And like, and preservatives. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? And the honest truth is that some of the arguments can be valid given your background. If you're somebody, for instance, who has lupus or has an autoimmune disease, the risk for disease, if you're taking an MMR, is actually higher because it's a live attenuated vaccine. It means that there's an actual virus there that's replicating. It's weakened, but if your immune system's weakened, it might still cause disease. So there are some legitimate arguments. Where I think the issue lies is, again, the messaging and communication. In the absence of understanding how these things work and what they're meant to do, and looking at the data of risk versus benefit for your average person out there, not knowing that information, you're susceptible to reading and interpreting things kind of at will. And so you get this one person who says, well, my child got the MMR and now they have autism, right? Which is a huge area in the anti-vax thing. The vaccine calls autism, right? But that one story, which isn't really been supported by anything other than a potential angry mother account, right? Then perpetuates this idea. And even though the science has shown with over 500,000 kids that there is no correlation between MMR vaccine and autism. And we keep having to go back to this argument over and over and over again. There is no proof. So I think it's...
So just to put a pin in that one, to put that another way, would it be safe to say if I was to create a parallel society where vaccines never existed and looked at the incidence rate of autism versus a society that does have vaccines, there would be no noticeable differences in the onset of autism? Is that kind of another way of looking at it?
Based on the science, based on the data, we've not shown any vaccines to have any correlation with autism. That's the honest truth. Again, you want to point at something, me personally, I think there's possibly, it could be microplastics, it could be chemicals in the environment. There's a lot of things out there that we have that we know are not good that could be causing autism. Conveniently, the MMR is often, you get it at about 18 months of age. That's often when autism gets diagnosed. So you can imagine that somewhere on Earth, somebody whose kid has autism just got the MMR and then gets diagnosed with autism at or near the same time.
Cause and effect.
And exactly. They say, well, clearly what happened here is that your vaccine gave my kid autism. And I get that. It's hard to deal with that reality that my child might have autism. And you're looking for something as a cause. Why my kid, right? But the data hasn't pointed to it being the vaccine. It could be something else. It could be something in our environment. It could be something genetic that's just out there. I don't know. We don't know the cause, what's causing this rapid increase in autism. All we do know is that based on the data, it doesn't seem to be the vaccines. I know they're a convenient scapegoat, but the data's just not there. Believe me, if the scientific community could show that it was vaccines, we'd be happy to address the issue. We've been looking. We've been looking a lot.
At its core, a vaccine is a lesson for the immune system, a way to prepare for a threat without facing the full danger. The first modern vaccine, developed by Edward Jenner in 1796, used cowpox to protect against smallpox, a disease that killed an estimated 300 million people in the 20th century alone. Today, vaccines save an estimated 4 to 5 million lives every year worldwide. For many, the decision to vaccinate comes down to a personal risk calculation, but the odds are rarely as simple as they seem. In the 1950s, polio paralyzed more than 15,000 Americans each year. The risk of a serious vaccine side effect? Less than 1 in a million. The stakes aren't just individual, they're collective. When enough people are protected, outbreaks can be stopped before they start. You mentioned that the anti-vaccine movement had many faces over history, but the underlying kind of issues remain the same. Is there anything unique now in terms of the society that we live in that allows that message to kind of grab a foothold? The scientific foundations behind vaccinations, in terms of science, is one of the strongest pillars you can find, but yet is still being undermined now in kind of our modern society. What's a cocktail that kind of leads us to where we are now, where measles was so reasonably controlled in the US society to now being something the average person is concerned about for their child?
We're a perfect example. Right now, we're doing a podcast. I think the access to information, whether real or not, unchecked for validity, becomes a problem, right? So, where do people get their information today? You're not seeing kids pulling encyclopedias off shelves. Schools can't teach a lot of these things because it's become a politicized issue or controversial, or it's not part of state doctrine. So where do people get information? Where do they learn about these issues? Well, college is an area, but not everyone goes to college. Where people are getting a lot of information now is somewhere on the web, social media, podcasts. People listen to you, Gordon, and they're probably learning more about science from you than they ever learned in some of their high school or college classes.
In the digital age, misinformation spreads fast, sometimes 6 times faster than facts on social media. A single fraudulent study linking vaccines to autism, published in 1998 and later retracted, still fuels fears decades later. The World Health Organization estimates that 1.5 million deaths could be prevented each year with better vaccine coverage, yet global rates have slipped to their lowest since 2008. The result? Trust in science is fragile, and rare personal stories can overshadow decades of data, leading to the return of diseases like measles and polio.
And so the problem is that with this explosion of information and access to information, the questions of, is it real? Is it something we can trust? Is it something that's been validated? My watch decides it's going to spot check me.
Your watch wants to chime in
That's
too.
it, but that's a challenge, is where people get information, and we don't have an infrastructure. Technology's advancing and communications technology's advancing at a pace that we can't keep up with validation and with making sure that people are getting that information. And that comes with freedom of expression and information, right? We want people to be able to express their thoughts and express their ideas. But when other people listen to those, how they interpret those ideas can lead a whole bunch of different directions. And I think right now you combine these new avenues of communication with the lack of some of those checks, with also this desire to use these communication platforms to push political agendas, social agendas, cultural change. It creates a firestorm of people don't know what to trust, what not to believe. It almost creates these alternative realities and perspectives on what's going on out there. And that's where we reach a stage today where people have more distrust in science today than probably they've ever had, because they don't know, do we trust the scientists? Is this scientist being paid by the government, or being paid by a politician, or being paid by big pharma, or being paid by some entity to push an agenda that isn't itself real?
Vaccination isn't just about individual protection. It's about shielding the most vulnerable, those who can't be vaccinated, like infants or other people with compromised immune systems. This concept, known as herd immunity, has helped eradicate diseases like smallpox and drastically reduced others. But it only works when enough people participate. The choice to vaccinate is, in many ways, a choice about the kind of society we want to build. One of the things I struggle with, and I was talking to my wife in preparing for this episode, is, and I have conversations with neighbors, friends all the time who might be on that doubting or vaccine skepticism. And I enjoy having those conversations because I can kind of meet them where they're at. I can learn to genuinely understand like where they're coming from. I kind of like I have the patience for it. Other people might not. And one of the things that fascinates me is, some of the reasons I hear about the vaccines, I don't want to put anything foreign in my body. But that's not a view that they hold kind of outside of vaccines. They're okay with medicine, different therapeutics, other things like processed foods, and they just don't see vaccines in the same way that they see that. Like I struggle to understand that cognitive dissonance that exists with the vaccine specifically. But then I also talk to people who will not put anything in their body. They don't like med, they won't take Tylenol, they won't take Advil. And it's a little bit easier for me to understand that kind of worldview of like, I just choose not to put foreign things in my body. So any thoughts or comments about like that in your conversations that you have with people or your students, the things that you talk about?
Yeah, again, I just challenge people to, before you come to an opinion on something, go seek out, hopefully, information that's validated or has some level of expertise behind it. And we all are shaped by our experiences. We're all shaped by our background. We're all shaped by the environment we live in. So you grew up in a small town where you grew up eating farm fresh vegetables. You haven't had pesticides put on anything. You grow up in an environment where it's very natural. And then you're told, okay, take this virus that's been chemically modified, it's been mixed with a bunch of chemicals for preservatives and also to promote a more robust immune response. And you're like, what are these things you're putting in my body? This is not natural. I can understand where some of those arguments come from. What I would also say, though, is if you're in that boat, before you come to judgment immediately as something synthetic is bad for me, look at the data, go try to find some of the scientific information of why that vaccine is designed the way it is, how it works. And if you don't know, go talk to someone who's credible in that area, who you can get that information from to come to an understanding. And again, it's all about messaging, right? So again, we're shaped by our experiences in our past. And I mean, there's a lot of people that distrust isn't without merit from their life, right? I mean, they grow up in that environment. They're like, hey, I'm not used to them putting this stuff in a needle, injecting it in my arm. What is that? You know?
Right. My family lived here for decades and like a century, and we were fine. Like, why are we doing stuff differently now? Like, that's probably a lot of,
Again, from my side, it's risk and benefit. When we make a vaccine like polio, I'm sorry, but to me, I would vaccinate my child in a heartbeat, knowing, yes, there might be a potential for a side effect to avoid her having the chance of being paralyzed for life. And it's not going to happen to me, or I don't think that the odds are in my favor. That was something you talked about, right? What's the odds? I'm going to play the odds. I'm going to gamble here. I'm like, okay, maybe the odds are, 1950s, there was 50,000 kids, right? People who got paralyzed. And maybe in the United States at the time, there may have been we might have had somewhere in the realm of maybe 200 million people. So you're okay, the odds are in my favor, but do I really want the risk? Because what if I'm that one? Or what if my child is that one? So it's also about accepting, like, when these vaccines get approved, the chances of you having a side effect might be 1 in 3 million, 1 in 6 million. The chances of you getting the actual virus and getting paralyzed might be 1 in 500,000. If you're a gambler, which one are you going to take? Some people, they just question. They're like, it ain't going to happen to me, right? They're the risk takers. It's up to you. It's a personal decision. Where I draw the line and where I do get really frustrated is when we as a population have to recognize that we're not just protecting ourselves, but we're also potentially protecting others through vaccination. So while the vaccine is designed to prevent us from getting disease or severe disease, it's not going to prevent you from getting infected. But if your body's fighting that virus off really well, the amount of virus you're releasing and spreading will be a lot lower often. And therefore, it can help prevent other infections. It can help prevent spread. And if I can make sure by vaccinating myself that I'm preventing a child who has an autoimmune disorder from getting something that might make them extremely sick, I'm not just thinking of myself now, I'm thinking of the population. And so there is a social element to this as well. Instead of saying it's just about me, there's also a point where if that pathogen, if that disease can impact some of the more sensitive parts of our population, we need to be more cognizant of that. We saw a lot of old people get killed with COVID, right? And if you look at the vaccination rates in the elderly, which, by the way, politically tend to be on one end of the spectrum and not the side that tends to be pro-vaccine, they're very, very high. It's because they saw their friends dying from COVID. They saw the impact on society, and they as a group were like, no, not only am I going to get vaccinated, but I'm going to make sure I can also protect my friends, protect my community. So there is a community element here, which gets way more complex. And so these conversations about should I get vaccinated and, my perspectives, I think it gets a lot more complex when you think about as a population, that piece of it as well.
Vaccines are more than just a medical tool. They're a test of trust, of science, and of our willingness to act for the greater good. The debates may be centuries old, but the stakes remain urgent. As we navigate a world of evolving threats and information overload, the story of vaccines is still being written by scientists, by skeptics, and by all of us. This show was edited by me, Gordon Thane, with additional editing from LaShawn Benedict. Sound design and mixing by myself and LaShawn Benedict. The original music from The Music Room, composed by Tom Fox, licensed from Johnny Harris. The cover art design for our show by LaShawn Benedict. The Public Health Insight Podcast is produced by PHI Media. Thank you for listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for informative conversations, inspiring community action. If you enjoy our podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. See you in the next one.